'Tis the season to be jolly, and I hope that everyone is enjoying their holidays so far. Today I'm excited to finally be bringing you episode 1 of our Dark World series. For those of you who have an aversion to strong language, you have been warned. This video may not be for you, for this is not a story of happy holiday spirit. For those who do have a particular interest in our friend Krampus, this is going to be a long story. I advise you to pour yourself a drink, get a snack and make yourself as comfortable as possible while you enjoy some holiday horror. Dark World, Episode 1, Krampus Night. Dad sent me to bed early. I didn't understand why. So I used the curse word. Big deal. I'd heard Dad swear hundreds of times and no one sent him to bed early. Anya had been allowed to stay up, although I suppose she had thrown up a little. I would have thrown up a little too if it meant I could stay up and wait for Santa. I'd always waited for Santa, but each time a spell would come over me and I would sink into sleep. This would be the 10th time. 10 times! Even cats had less lives than that. I huffed my way up the stairs, stamping my feet, trying to get Mum and Dad to feel sorry for me as they cuddled my sister. It wasn't happening though. They sat there like two bears guarding their cub, and there was no room for me. I wondered what sort of trouble I'd be in right now if I swore in anger, but I chose not to. Well, not at them. I whispered it to myself quietly with a grin on my face. Shit. As I got into bed, I stared at the window opposite me, where I could see the snowflakes drifting in the wind. I wondered whether if I sat there with my nails digging into my thigh, I could stay up and watch Santa's sleigh soaring across the sky. But then I thought about the possibility of Santa sneaking up on the other end of the house. I wouldn't forgive myself if he crept down a chimney while I was staring out the window. I glanced at the clock and noticed it was nearing 7 o'clock. But that seemed a little too early for Santa to start delivering presents. He'd probably come in the thick of night, or maybe even the early hours of the morning. I sure had a long wait and nothing to do. I began to get restless. Shit, I said out loud again, but not loud enough that they'd hear me downstairs. I didn't see the big deal with what I said. I swore. I didn't hurt no one. Mum had said it was a bad word, but what's so bad about shit? I'd said the word so many times in my mind that it didn't really make sense to me anymore. I turned on my side and sat with my hands clasped painfully around my leg. Good luck falling asleep like that, I told myself. There was no way I was missing Santa this time. I wouldn't let myself miss him ever again. I closed my eyes for just a second, just to test whether I could possibly fall asleep while so uncomfortable. I could hear the sounds of my sister laughing like she hadn't thrown up at all. Mum and Dad were laughing after that too, probably tickling her like they used to tickle me. I felt the grip around my leg begin to loosen, and though I knew I should have lifted my head up off the pillow, I didn't. The sound of my sister's laughter droned out into silence, and pretty soon after that I had dozed off. When I woke with a start. I sprang forward so hard that I thought I pulled something in my neck. It was dark outside, darker than it had been before, so dark that I couldn't even see the moon. My heart was beating fast, though not with the usual excitement that I had on this night. No, it was dread. Dread that I'd failed again. I looked at the clock and saw it was 12 minutes past midnight, perhaps the latest I'd ever been up. I guess that in itself was exciting, awake at this time breaking the rules. Shit, I whispered to myself and giggled. Giggled that I'd not only sworn, but I was up past my bedtime. I hoped Santa hadn't come yet. I kicked the duvet off my bed and was about to spring downstairs, but then I heard it. The ringing of bells. No, it couldn't be. My heart was thumping again. This time it was true excitement as I ran to the window. I couldn't see him, not in the dark, but I could hear his sleigh. I was so bad at controlling my excitement that I started jumping around the room. Quietly though, because I knew if Dad came in then he would just ruin the fun. The bells on Santa's sleigh went quiet, but I imagined he had parked on a roof and was now shimmying down the chimney. I had to see him, just to get a glimpse of him. My friends were beginning to think that maybe, just maybe, Santa wasn't real at all. But if I saw him with my own eyes, I could know for myself. He had to be real. He was real. He was downstairs right now. It made me wonder why I was even stalling. Shit! I gasped eagerly. I carefully opened the door and rounded the corner, descending down the first set of steps, narrowly avoiding the creaky floorboard past my sister's room. I only had a few more steps to go before I could peek in between the banister rail and spot him by the tree, but then my sister's door opened. Shit, I sighed, fully thinking it was my father standing there, and then I realised I'd have been in double trouble because I swore again. Dom? Came Anya's voice. Shh! I spun round and shushed her. She stood there rubbing her eyes and yawning loudly too. What are you doing up? You're gonna be in trouble, she said with a sly grin. What are you doing up? I hissed at her. You're gonna be in trouble too. Mum said I can get up and go to the toilet when I want to because I'm sick. She poked her tongue out at me. I would have pushed her over if I knew she'd fall in silence, but that was too risky. I just lifted my hand and gave her the middle finger. A boy at school had called it the bird, but I wasn't too sure what it meant. He'd gotten in trouble for using it. I thought maybe it might have hurt Anya in some way. "What does that mean?" She sneered at me. "It means," and I looked at my finger uncertainly, "it means something bad." "Oh yeah?" She did it back at me. "Go back to bed." I turned away and continued creeping down the stairs. "I'm gonna tell Mum in the morning," she said with a yawn and then slithered back into her room. "Stupid girl," I said as I carried on down the stairs. I made it to the bottom of the stairs, and I could hear shuffling in the next room. He wasn't being as quiet as I thought he might be, but then again I guess I'd be clumsy too if I was as fat as Santa. The door to the living room was ajar as I peered in. I could see our Christmas tree, all lit up with green and red decorations strewn about it. The lights around the branches flickered, and I could smell the festive aroma. "Ah!" I heard Santa bark as he tripped over something. "Stubbed my fucking toe!" I'd heard that word used before, but I didn't know what it meant. It sure sounded worse than shit though. I thought about turning away, creeping back up to bed as I let Santa get on with it, but I had to see him, so why did I feel so scared all of a sudden? "Bastard time of year this is." He was still grunting. "Swear to God this is the last one." No, that couldn't be Santa, could it? I pushed the door open a little more, hoping to catch a glimpse of him I so desperately wanted to see, but the fear grew even more as I heard him guzzling liquor from Dad's cabinet. My hand was shaking as I reached out for the doorknob again, and all of a sudden I felt the need to pee. I pushed the door an inch, and then another, until the door was moving back on its own to reveal the rest of the room. He stood there with his back to me, chugging down a bottle of brown booze that Dad normally saved for special occasions. I'd sipped it once, but it really burned my throat, and since then I kept away from it. How my dad drank it at all, I'll never know, but seeing Santa knock it back like it was Ribena was unsettling. He swayed to the left, and then to the right, and before long he was buckling over his own feet, falling flat on his face. "Santa!" I gasped. He looked up immediately, and just for a moment I thought I saw that jolly red face that I was so used to seeing. But no, instead there was a cold cruelness to his eyes as they bore into me. His beard was wet with alcohol, and he let out an angry snarl. "You cunt!" he barked as he thrusted his big finger at me. I wanted to run. I tried to run back upstairs, but somehow I was frozen to the spot. "Come here!" he growled as he staggered to his feet. I was shaking now. I didn't know what I had done wrong. All I knew was that Santa was mad at me, and now I was in even more trouble. It was more than just trouble though. I could see it in the way Santa hobbled towards me, his fists clenched and his rosy red cheeks looking like they were filled with lava. I tried to move my legs and dart upstairs. Mum and Dad would be mad at me for being up so late, but it had to be better than what Santa had in mind. His eyebrows were buried deep down and his eyes were red, like he hadn't slept at all. He moved quick all of a sudden, grabbing me by the t-shirt and yanking me forward. He pulled me so hard that I nearly fell in the same way he did. "There's always one flipping kid who can't stay asleep," he hiccuped. He wasn't keeping his voice down either. Any second now my parents would come running down and I'd be in for it. I broke free of him and tried to shuffle my way under the Christmas tree out of his wrath, but my body didn't respond. I ended up just falling on my butt, and then all I could do was just stare up at him, hugging my knees as tightly as I could as he stuffed another cookie in his mouth. "You naughty bastards make my work longer than it needs to be. Why can't you just be good? Ugh!" And he stopped to pull out the longest list that I've ever seen. It spilled out of his pocket, and he quietly mumbled a few names as he read down the list until he found my name. "Dom," he sneered before crumbling up the list and stuffing it in his pocket. "Yes, you've been naughty, haven't you?" "No, Santa," I managed to squeak. "Swearing," he shook his head. "Flipping off your sister, staying up late. These are terrible things for a child to do." "I'm sorry, Santa," I cried out, and I genuinely meant it too. I didn't mind being on the naughty list. In fact, I didn't mind not receiving presents at this point. I just didn't want my parents to know, and I didn't want Santa to be mad at me. "You're going to have to be punished, Dominic," he told me with the faintest sound of enjoyment in his otherwise gruff voice. "Punished?" I could barely get the words out. "Please don't tell my mum and dad." "Your mum and dad?" He choked with a laughter. "Fuck that. I'm not letting your pussy parents deal with this punishment. I have a special friend for that." "Who?" I shuddered. Was one of the elves going to come out and beat me? "What took you so bloody long?" Santa said, but I realised he wasn't talking to me, and instead speaking at something that must have been right behind me. I looked behind me and saw something standing there. Well, I say standing, but it was hunched over, leering down at me like I was his prey. The skin around his face was wrinkled, sagging, and he had the thickest set of yellow-stained teeth. Drool pulled down the side of his lips, and there was a long, wispy beard that blended in with the dark grey fur on his chest. He had curved horns jutting out from his forehead, Both of them looked like they were stained in blood. His hands were massive with long skeletal fingers and they were black at the nail. As he stood there breathing, I could hear the air being sucked out through his nose, though struggling, like there were blocks of bogies stuck up there. He had no eyes, just two dark voids where his eyes should have been, filled with crimson. Chains were hung around his wrists, tightly wrapped around his chest and hanging loosely around his hip. Each time he moved, he made a jingling sound eerily similar to Santa's sleigh. The same sound I heard upstairs. I screamed, or at least I thought I did, but there was no sound. Automatically I found myself crawling on my hands and knees as I tried to scarper under the tree, but the creature man thing was faster and clutched at my ankle with its giant hand. I shouted for my mum and dad as he yanked me out, but they didn't show up. Baubles from the Christmas tree came raining down around me, but still, they didn't come rushing downstairs to my rescue. I wondered if they'd be down here if it was Arnu being attacked. I tried to wrench my leg free, but before long there were golden sticks in the creature's hand, and it lifted them high above its head. "Get on with it!" Santa slurred as he started to open another bottle, scratching at his crotch as he did. "Gonna need a piss in a minute." The sticks came down hard against my leg, not once but at least a dozen times. The creature, or whatever it was, had a gruesome smile on its face, like it truly was happy causing me pain. I winced with every strike, frantically trying to free myself as he began to twist my ankle. "Stop!" I cried out. "Please, I'll be good. I'll be good." "And you won't swear anymore?" Santa squatted nearby. He dropped some kind of pink colour pills and was having difficulty finding them, even though they were right in front of him. "I swear, I promise, I won't," I begged, and I thought it was best not to mention that he spent the better part of our encounter with a potty mouth himself. "They sure don't make LSD like they used to," he muttered to himself as he found purchase on the pills. "Krampus, take him to the Lair. I don't believe a single word out of this little bastard's mouth." "No!" I screamed. I didn't even know what the Lair was or even who Krampus was, but neither sounded good. Krampus or whatever he was pulled out a sack with one hand and began whipping it into the air until it unfolded. Then with his other hand wrapped around my ankle, he lifted me up like I weighed nothing and tossed me into the bag. And then I was falling. Zealots, the whole pack of them. I would have spat over the railing, but I didn't think they deserved it. A dozen of them had gathered in the narrow streets below, frolicking in the snow like an unruly bunch of teenagers. You wouldn't have guessed that down there were grown men and women, each one of them donning dark fur around their shoulder, covering their entire body. If you looked back and forth real quick, you might have mistaken them for a bunch of wild animals rolling about in the snow. But sooner or later you'd see their gruesome costumes, most of them adorning horns and bloody fangs. I hated them, not because of the racket they were making down below, but because of how ignorant they were. Like I said, I would have spat over the railing, but I didn't want to waste it on them. One of them was rolling around in the snow, making some kind of snow angel, whilst another was jingling chains around his wrist. The others were skulking behind cars, sneaking up on people, who like me were either just too tired from a hard day's work to humour their stupid game, or who were simply just too mature. One of them jumped in front of an elderly man's face, and the elderly man shrieked, dropped his bags and started screaming at the top of his lungs. Not too far away from him, one of them struck a woman with a birch stick they were carrying, but she too didn't see the funny side to it, and started smacking him with her handbag. "Idiot," I muttered, and watched as the smoke spilled out from my mouth, billowing into the air. "Cass," Arno called from the next room, "is the Krampus Schlauf still going on?" What kind of stupid question was that? I clasped my hands around the lukewarm coffee mug that I still held, and leaned in closer over the balcony, contemplating whether it was worth forsaking the mug just to hit one of them. Of course it was still going on. It never flipping ended. December was infected with fiends like the ones below, dressing up as a monster that they had no right to. If only they knew the dangers of that thing, then... Well, I didn't know what. No one had ever believed me. "Yeah, I'm watching them," I called back at Arno, my roommate, who I'm sure only spoke to me because he liked the sound of his own voice. "Good," he stumbled out onto the balcony, and for a moment, "How do I look?" My head pulsed for a split second. The air had been sucked out of me. I didn't quite know where to look at first, but I was soon a slave to those shallow black holes it had for eyes. Its horns were just as I remembered, one of them crooked and broken, and the other drizzled in blood. I felt my hand twitching by my side, reaching for the nearest weapon, a plant in a pot. He was back. After all this time, he'd finally come back. I swore that I'd be ready for him, but there I was with my lukewarm coffee, one hand reaching for my heart to make sure it was still there, powerless. "Cass?" I thought I heard Arno as Krampus stood there in the doorway, his hands on his hips as his knees rocked back and forth in some strange-looking dance. "It doesn't look that bad, does it?" It took me a moment. You'll have to forgive me. If you knew what I'd seen, you'd know I needed that moment. I stood there blankly, like some stupid deer caught in the headlights of a car, too stunned to move and yet almost too aware of the impending danger. I had to force my jaw open, wrestling against my own lips until the words spilled out in anger. "You asshole!" I roared and lunged at him, snatching him by the throat and knocking that god-awful mask off his face, his scrawny and feeble face looking more panicked than I ever did. "I told you in the ad when you first moved in here that I wanted no goddamn Krampus shit in this building." I spoke slowly, peppering each of my words with as much venom as I could. I wanted him to know my frustration, wanted him to know my pain, but it fell on deaf ears, much as it always did. "Okay, Cass." He laughed nervously and managed to slither out of my grip. "Let's not get too carried away here. It's just a costume. Krampus isn't even real. It's all just a made-up story. You don't know." The words "you weren't there" were sure to follow, but I quickly realised what a loon I must have sounded like and chose to sip my coffee instead. "When are you going to let that go?" he said as he stuffed his mask and his outrageous horns under his arm. "You're 35 in a few months and you're still scared of Krampus. Maybe you should see someone. Maybe I should see you out of this flat," I thought to say with one eye twitching. "You want to see creepy shit, Cass?" he said as he disappeared inside, only to reappear with a tablet in his hand. "Look at this." He passed it to me and I took it reluctantly, as I stared down at the image of what looked like the front cover of a book. A warrior flying a white horse into the path of a fire-breathing monster. Greek mythology explained. A deeper look at— No, not that. He swiped the image away. "That's just some bullshit ad. Here, look at the article. Man kills wife with bare hands after finding her eating his son." Jesus. What the fuck is this? I looked up at him and his giddy expression. Messed up, right? Apparently the dude's been saying it's some man-eating spirit or something. "This is disgusting." I shoved the tablet back in his hand. "In fact, I find you quite repulsive at the moment, if you don't mind me saying." "You're really pulling my heartstrings here, Cass," he said with a gaudy laugh. I just looked at him blankly, trying to stop myself from punching him in the face. I mean, sure, we weren't the closest people, but I had made the mistake of telling him about, well, the incident. To his credit, he hadn't laughed at me, but it was obvious that he didn't believe me either. You wouldn't dress up as an axe-wielding psychopath if someone had been traumatized by a lumberjack, so why was it okay to dress up as that monster, knowing the effect it would have on me? "I'm gonna go enjoy the festivities," he said with a nod of his head. "You sure you don't want to come?" I glanced up at the sky and thought it was high time I got into bed. The sun would be rising soon, and I had no intention of facing it. "You know, working at that club at these unsociable hours is gonna have an effect on you," Arno said, though his voice was muffled by his mask as he hobbled back inside. "You ought to make sure that you're getting enough vitamin D. You know, I don't think I've ever seen you go out in the daytime. No wonder you're so pale." "Go to hell," I muttered back at him as I poured the last few drops of my coffee over the railing. "I'm already there," he called back as he hopped to the door with his giant claw-like feet. I wondered if it was worth making another coffee, given that I was going to lay in bed awake anyway, but I thought better of it. I waited until I saw Arno emerge outside in the street below, and watched as he joined the Krampus, that wretched festival. "Idiot," I muttered as I made my way to bed. I woke up with a start, half expecting to see my bedroom ceiling, instead of the sparkling dagger-like icicles hanging above me, threatening to fall. I let out a shriek, though I hadn't meant to. I sounded like a little girl. It was dark here, but a silver light spilled in through the cracks of the icy walls. Where am I? I wondered, as I scuttled back against a damp wall, my knees held tightly against my chest. I was freezing cold, and each time I let out a breath, grey smoke billowed out of my mouth like a chimney. I was shivering, my teeth clattering as I began to snivel at the nose. I wanted my mum. I would have taken my dad at this point. Wherever I was, it sure wasn't home. I thought back to Santa Claus, and there was a moment of elation as I remembered the Santa I thought I knew, but then that moment was ripped away, scrunched up like a ball of paper and set on fire. The Santa I'd seen, the real Santa, appeared in my mind all drunk and swearing, and worst of all, that was the only Santa that I'd ever remember from that point on. My trousers were damp, not from wetting myself, although that might still happen, but from the snow in which I sat. I wish I had a jacket, or maybe even a portable heater. I'd seen Mum use a blow dryer, which I thought would come in really handy right about now. I sat there in my Jungle Book pajamas, getting colder and wetter by the second, my bare toes tingling as the cold air wrapped around them. Something echoed through the cavern. At least I thought it was a cavern. Looking to the right, I only saw a wall of blue ice, some of which was a little reflective, and I could see hundreds of tiny faces staring back. I looked like I wanted to cry, and to be honest, I felt like that too. I looked to the left, and the cavern extended further, along a floor of slippery ice hidden by a carpet of settled snow. Beyond that, there was just darkness, but pockets of light spilled in through the cracks in the ceiling here and there. "Shit," I trembled, I wish I had never said the word, but there I was again. I thought back to the monster that had grabbed me and felt a horribly icy chill swim through me. Santa had called him Krampus, but I'd never heard any stories or songs about him. Mum and Dad surely would have said something, wouldn't they? He had to have been evil, had to have been like one of the monsters I'd seen under my bed, but they were nowhere near as ugly or gruesome. Besides, Dad always scared them away. Krampus was bigger than Dad, even though he looked hunched over. And while Dad was strong, he'd never been able to lift me up by one leg and toss me into a sack like that. I still couldn't understand how I got here. One minute I was falling, and the next I woke up here. I supposed I wasn't going to find answers sitting around here waiting for a rescue. Even though my gut told me to stay put, I slowly got to my feet and moved like a pigeon across the snow and further into the cavern. Perhaps there was an exit up ahead. Surely there had to be an exit, didn't there? My feet crunched in the snow, and for the first time in my life I realised how important shoes were. Mum was always telling me to wear my slippers whenever I went outside, and now I know why. It was like stepping on spikes, the ice and the snow working together to stab at the back of my feet, cramping until they were redder than anything I've ever seen before. Something rocked the cavern then. It had me pinned to my spot, breath held tight as it washed over me. It sounded like laughter, but not just any laughter, an evil sort of laughter that came from deep within someone's throat, someone or something. I thought I saw a shadow move across the wall of a hunched horned figure, but when I shrieked backwards I realised that it wasn't moving at all, just a rock, nothing more. The laughter still bounced off the walls, echoing throughout the cavern and back the way it came until it droned out, quieting until eventually silent. I wanted to cry. In fact, no. I was crying. Tears strolled down my face, but I couldn't feel them. I think some of them may have frozen on my cheek. I wondered if my parents were going to come running out of the darkness to hold me and carry me home, and whether or not they even noticed I was gone at all. I bet if it was Anya they'd have noticed straight away. Probably would have realised she was in danger long before she could have been brought to this place. It had me clenching my fists as I thought about it, and they loved her more. Be brave, I told myself as I forced one foot in front of the other. There was no one to hug or hold me here, but maybe when I got out I could find Mum and Dad, and then they'd love me again. Surely. Maybe if they saw me come back from this icy place all by myself, then maybe they'd be proud of me and love me again. Maybe they'd even shove Anya to one side, just like they did with me, and I'd get all the attention again. It made my heart beat with excitement again, and I guess that was the best I could hope for, as I was brought back to reality by a whip of cold air. I hoped that I didn't hear that throaty laughter again as I moved forward. I crept slowly, partly in case I stumbled in the dark and partly because I didn't want to run into Krampus. If he was down here, there was no way I was going to outrun him with my frozen feet. If I listened carefully, I could still hear that throaty laughter, but quieter now. Like a lingering echo, it made me shiver even more. I must have walked at least 20 minutes before I could go no further. My legs were frozen and I could barely bend them at the knee without almost falling over. I was about to collapse on my face, but then I noticed something in the near distance. What looked like a yellow light was switched on, as by itself, and hanging there from the icy ceiling was an actual light bulb, hung by a thin line of tinsel. I felt like I was trespassing all of a sudden, as I crept closer. Below the light bulb was an old rotten desk tucked into a secluded corner. Papers were littered here and there, some of them in large piles like a teacher's desk, and others pinned against the icy walls. As I got closer, I could see a damp notice board hung crookedly against the wall, with pictures of children all around the same age as me, none of which were smiling, but instead quite the opposite. I carefully reached my shaking hand out towards the desk and took one of the papers from the stack. Naughty List 2018, it read, and was followed by a list of names. I set the paper back where I found it, and took to studying the photos in more detail. In one larger photo that had been stored in a frame, Santa stood with his hands by his hips as children sat around him, all of them crying. At first I didn't understand why, but then I saw the bottle of liquor in his hand, as well as a shaded figure that lingered over his shoulder, with chains draped around its wrist. I noticed that the desk drawer hadn't been shut properly, and my gut told me to leave it alone, but I couldn't resist peering inside. I took a step closer to the desk, sliding my feet towards it until I reached the knob on the drawer. I could barely feel any of my fingers, let alone get a decent grip, but when I did I was able to pull the drawer open so I could see what lay inside. It was just coal. Small black shards of coal. It didn't make sense right away. Who even kept coal in a desk? Come to think of it, who even had a desk fitted in a place like this? I pushed the drawer closed and was about to carry on further in the cavern when I heard something that had my spine straighten. "You shouldn't be here," came a voice behind. I didn't want to turn around, but the voice didn't sound too threatening. I spun around only to see another boy, who looked like he was the same age as me. He too was wearing pajamas, but at least he had slippers. He didn't look like the cold bothered him as much as it bothered me, but I could tell in the weary expression on his face that he was scared. He kept looking further into the cavern and then back at me, his panicked eyes growing wider and wider. "Quickly!" he hissed. "Hide!" What? I just looked at him blankly as he dove behind a snow-dug trench, one I think he might have made himself. "Hide!" he hissed again. "He's coming!" Who? I frowned. But I should have known. The air became suddenly stale, and from the darkness ahead I could hear the rattling of chains. The boy had now disappeared entirely behind his trench, and I would have joined him if I didn't think he'd kick me out. So I doubled back to the desk, got down on all fours and scurried underneath. I only realised how loud I was breathing when I saw him emerge ahead of me, the hunchback figure, with dark wet fur and 2 crooked horns that stuck out from his head. Its face was as wrinkly as I remembered, only now it looked like it had grey veins travelling through its cheeks, disappearing into the white forest of his beard. I shivered at the sight of him, hoping to God that he didn't come towards the desk. He began sniffing the air, grunting to himself as he staggered forward, head swiveling left and right. In his hand he had the same sack that he used to capture me, but now it looked empty as it trailed along the ground behind him. His eyes scanned the cavern, 2 dark pits of nothing, eyeing each and every crevice in the vicinity. He stopped, sniffing the air like he smelled something. I wondered if it was my fear. He glanced over in my direction and I shut my eyes, tensing every muscle in my body in the hopes that he didn't see me. But could I really be so lucky? I knew I needed to open my eyes, for if I didn't, I wouldn't be able to see him coming at me. Then again, maybe that was a good thing. A part of me wanted to keep my eyes shut forever. Another part of me wanted to dig my fingers into my ears so I didn't hear the awful rattling of the chains and the ghastly sounds that escaped his mouth. I swallowed back my fear, I took a quiet deep breath, and then I forced my eyes open, only to see Krampus staring directly at me. I tried to move, tried to run from out under the desk and back the way I'd came, but I was paralysed. I started to breathe heavier, whimpering as my eyes swelled with tears. I tried forcing myself to move, but nothing worked. I was stuck under the desk, trembling at the sight of Krampus, whose black mouth was now bent into a smile. He moved slow, chains rattling as he stomped his giant feet in the snow. He began to straighten in his stride, and his shadow spread before him in a long line of darkness. He abandoned the sack as it fell limp in the snow and rubbed his massive hands together, smiling even more. I tried pushing back against the wall as the feeling returned to my bones, but it was too late. No matter how much I pushed against it, there was no escaping. What was I expecting to happen? For some magic door to open and for me to go tumbling through? I was about to shoot up and try and run, but the desk had become more of a prison than a hiding place. I had to crawl out from underneath it first, and by the time I did, Krampus would have grabbed me. So I sat there, like a helpless insect in the wake of a spider. I clenched my fist, but what was I going to do? Box with Krampus? He began grunting excitedly. The gruesome face came closer and closer as he lowered himself to my level. I shut my eyes and curled up tightly into a little ball as he reached under the desk, his nails scratching against the wood. But then he made a disgruntled sound. I opened my eyes and saw him looking back at the trench where the other boy was hiding. And just like that, he left me alone as he stalked over to the other boy. "No!" the boy screamed. Krampus was deceptively fast. I didn't know how he knew the boy was there, but he did. He lunged at him, stomping through the snow with his giant feet, and grabbed the boy by the neck. I saw the boy squirm, legs and hands flapping as he reached for the air. It might have been selfish, but I was relieved it wasn't me. My body moved on its own without even thinking. I'd crawled out from under the desk and bolted further into the darkness, but not before I heard the other boy's neck snap and the crunch of the bone echo throughout the cavern. I woke with a start, drenched in my own sweat. You'd think when you dreamt the same dream over and over and over again, you'd get used to it, but I never did. Each time I woke from those accursed dreams, I found myself panting for breath, sometimes even retching. Red light from that neon sign outside my flat flooded the room, and the constant humming buzz that the sign emitted would see to it that I would not sleep another wink. I looked at the clock and saw it was 3 a.m. Time to feed then, I thought. I stretched as I got out of bed and lumbered my way to the door, dragging my feet as I did. You might think that eating at 3 a.m. is a weird habit, but when I get my urges for sustenance, I get them hard. You wouldn't like me when I'm hungry. And no, I'm not talking about those edgy girls who get hangry if they haven't had a meal in an hour or two. No. I'd straight up take a bite out of you and drain you until there was nothing left. Such was the way of things. I didn't bother turning the lights on as I felt my way around the kitchen. It wasn't until I found the fridge that I noticed the note on the door. I put the cranberry juice in the bottom rack. Cold. Just the way you like it. A. Thanks, Arno. I scrunched up the note and tossed it behind me. I guess you have your uses. I didn't bother pouring myself a glass. I just tore open the carton and chugged it down, moaning as I felt the smooth liquid crisp in my throat and slither on down inside me. I still remembered the day that Arno tried my cranberry juice and spat it back out, complaining that it was the worst thing he'd ever tasted. The fact that he'd wasted a mouthful had me twitching with disgust, but I had to forgive him. He didn't know how important my cranberry juice was to me. I spilled a bit of it down the side of my face as I drained the contents of the carton. I came up for air, spilling a bit more down my neck and over my top before going back for more. You wouldn't understand. It wasn't just ordinary cranberry juice after all. It was... well, I guess it doesn't really matter. Once I'd finished the carton, I scrunched it up with my fist and lobbed it at the bin. Arno was probably still out with those hooligans in the Krampus and was likely at some bar in the town getting drunk. Any second now I'd get that drunken text that he was lost and I'd have to race to drive him home. Well, this time he could go ahead and sleep in the alleyway, drowning in his own vomit for all I cared. I was still pissed off that he had gone ahead and dressed up as that hideous creature after everything I told him. I swore to God that if he returned wearing that costume, I'd rip off those horns that he so proudly wore and plunge them into his neck. I staggered my way across the kitchen, over into the living room where I tripped over my own slippers. The damn things were never where I expected. I felt for them with my feet and found purchase on one of them, but the other must have gone under the couch. When I managed to eventually pull it out, it was heavier than it should have been, and had a moisty, rocky scent to it. Worst thing about it was I knew that smell. In fact, I knew it all too well. My heart thundered as I ran to the light switch. I punched it so hard I was sure I made a hole in the wall, but as the light swept the room, my attention was drawn to my slippers. I shrieked as I dropped them to the floor, and as they hit the ground, black fragments of coal spilled out. No. I backed away from them. No, it can't be. My skin was flushed with goose pimples and I suddenly found it hard to breathe. I backed further away from the slippers, unable to take my eyes away from them as I began to quake in fear, a fear that I'd long since forgotten. In that moment, I was a little girl again, and there was nothing I could do to escape the feeling that everything around me was closing in. That's when I heard him. I tried to turn around, and my first instinct was to make a fist and swing it as hard as I could. But I couldn't. I could hear his tongue clicking in his mouth. I could hear the chains rattling by his side. I could hear the struggle in his nasally breath. I could hear everything that I'd heard all those years ago, all of it preserved in my memory forever. And now it was here again. For real this time. Arno, I started. Arno, this isn't fucking funny. But Arno didn't reply as I turned to face him. Arno, I said again. But Arno's mask didn't have those dark, hollow eyes and the black, gorge-like wrinkles that this thing did. Arno wasn't as tall either, and he didn't have the same fearsome girth. Arno, stop it! I continued on anyway, hoping that somehow it was him, and I wasn't about to relive my worst nightmare all over again. Arno, for fuck's sake! I begged, still hoping that he would start laughing in that horribly irritating way that he did. But the only thing that happened was Krampus opening his sack as he came at me with a mad and wheezy cackle. I didn't stop running, even though I felt my legs grow sore and my feet scream at me in pain. I wanted to look over my shoulder, but I was scared just in case I saw Krampus barreling after me. I couldn't hear him on my tail, and that was good enough for me, but it didn't help me get out of this place. For all I knew, I was heading around in a circle, and any second now I'd round a corner and end up back by the desk with Krampus waiting for me. There was a rickety bridge ahead of me that swayed in the draft, but I didn't stop to consider the risk. I hopped on the bridge and darted across it, even though the panels beneath my feet gave way and broke off, disappearing down below into the dark gorge. I held onto the ropes at the side, striding my way across, only to trip up on my own feet towards the end. I smacked the snow hard, inhaling a bunch of it as I choked for air. I must have looked like a flopping fish as I rolled onto my back, desperately trying to get up. I couldn't see Krampus as I caught my breath, scanning the area with my heart hurling itself against my chest. The bridge creaked as it swayed back and forth and the wind whistled through the cavern, nipping at my sides. I had to swallow, and there was a moment of silence, but then my breath fell back, breathing cold vapour like a dragon might have breathed fire. I knew I couldn't sit here long. Krampus had seen me, and while the other kid bought me some time, I didn't know how long I had. I didn't want to think about him anyway. I guess I felt responsible for his death. There were tears in my eyes even though I didn't know who he was. I wondered if he was like me, sneaking out of bed to see Santa, only to find what I had found. I slammed my fist into the snow before climbing to my shaky feet. Dad once told me you could die from a thing called frostbite, but I didn't know if I had it or not. How do you even die from frostbite anyway? Do you just fall over and stop living? Or was there some sort of sign? My hands had gone blue, but my feet looked like they were turning black. I knew that couldn't have been a good sign. I turned around and started heading further into the cavern, where I found a torchlight flickering in the dark. Orange light sprang ahead, lighting the way into what felt like a warmer, more inviting area of this strange place. For one, the snow was gone, and in its stead was a hard-looking floorboard, all of which was laid crookedly out of place. Rusty nails stuck out like warped fingers in the wood, and in the gaps of the broken boards was black dirt. It was warmer here, but there was a stuffy air that hit me hard in the face. I was still shivering as I wandered inside, my hands wrapped tightly around myself as I headed in. What looked like dead trees were fused into the cavern walls. Thick branches stretched far and wide. They were ghastly things in themselves, shadowy thick-set divisions that looked like bones of skeletons scattered here and there. Chains were dangling from the ceiling, most of them rusted, and others stained and dripping with fresh blood. Some of them had cuffs, and to my horror I could see one that had a bloody hand trapped inside, a bit of bone just jutting out from the wrist. I held onto my lunch and walked quickly past, avoiding looking at the hand at all cost. Further up was an icy slope that looked like it might have led somewhere, but even if I had shoes, I still wasn't climbing that. It was cold to touch, so cold that I was afraid my tongue would get stuck if I licked it, not that I would do something so silly. I wanted to climb it though. I doubt Krampus could fit inside the small crawl space, and even if it didn't lead anywhere, it was a place that I could hide. There was another bridge above me, but this one wasn't held together by rope. There were wooden beams that held it up from the ground, but the wooden rail above had been smashed to pieces. Barrels were littered at the base of the stairway, leading up to the bridge, and I had the urge to see what might have been inside. That was when I heard the sound of scratching. Had Krampus found me already? I lunged behind the barrels, ducked down behind them and peered out through the gap between. Something was definitely coming, though it sounded like it was coming down the icy slope that I had seen. The sound of something grazing against the ice was accompanied by the cry of a woman, and then, suddenly she came sliding out from the slope, crashing hard against the floor. I'd never seen her before. She looked scared. Perhaps as scared as I was, as she glanced around the room with more than just fear, like she was remembering something and didn't want to believe it. Mum had always told me not to talk to strangers, and so with that in mind I thought it was best to stay hidden. Her hands were tied behind her back with rope, and she looked like she'd hit the ground pretty hard with her face. Still, she glanced around like a hawk, rolling on the ground as she tried to free herself. "Shit!" the woman hissed. I started to feel like the word was a lot more common than Dad would have me believe. I noticed that she didn't have any footwear either. Actually, she didn't have much clothing at all, except for grey shorts and a grey vest. There was a rope around her ankles that I only just noticed, and as far as I could see, she wasn't going anywhere, even though she rolled around like a mad animal trying to break free. Maybe I should have helped her straight away. I mean, even though Mum said not to talk to strangers, she would have wanted me to help someone in need, wouldn't she? But then again, I began to think why she was tied up, and why she was here in Krampus's lair. She must have done something terrible, surely. I must have crouched for a good 5 minutes before she stopped wriggling like a worm. She roared ahead through gritted teeth at nothing at all. She grew red in the face, panting heavily. Each one of her breaths sounded like a motor. It was only then when she was completely quiet that I realized I had a choice to make. Did I let myself be known, or was I better off sitting tight behind the barrels hoping that Krampus would never find me? She managed to roll herself over to the wall, head down with her hair covering her face. "Fucking Krampus," she muttered. "Since when did he start tying people up?" Perhaps she was on my side, or at least against Krampus. That was the best thing I could hope for. I thought about trying to sneak past her, or maybe whether I should have just bolted on. It wasn't as if she could stop me, given that she was tied up. The worst thing about it all was I needed to pee real bad, but I didn't want to risk her hearing me. Then what was I going to do? Pretend I couldn't see her? "Are you just going to sit there, or are you going to help me?" She spoke to me. My breath caught in my throat, but when I looked at her through the gaps of the barrels, I could see her hair still covering her face. I ducked down behind the barrels once more, trying to make myself as small as possible. How had she seen me? No, she couldn't have been talking to me. She hadn't even looked over here. How would she have known I was here? "I can hear your teeth chattering," she muttered as if she wasn't interested at all. It was only then that I realized my teeth had been crunching against each other. "You'd better come over here and warm yourself up," she said before deciding on a piece of wood and discarding the rest. "Who are you?" I peered out from behind the barrels. She looked up at the bridge and then glanced up at the stairway, following it up and across. "I never wanted to come back here, but he's finally come for me." "Who?" I forced myself out from behind the barrel. I decided that she wasn't as scary as Krampus, but she did have a certain air about her that made me not want to trust her. "You haven't seen him yet?" She looked at me with a cold set of dark eyes. "He's the one who brought you here." "Krampus," I whispered. She nodded. "What the hell is he?" I asked. She raised an eyebrow at me then. "I can see how you ended up here using language like that." "Shit," I sighed, only to see her eyebrow raise even higher. I mean Don." "Swear all you like, kid," she shrugged her shoulders. "It might be the last chance you get." "What do you mean?" I asked. "Krampus," she stressed like it was obvious. He's gonna kill us unless we escape his lair. He's a vengeful creature who never forgets anything. Even if we manage to get out, or he decides to let you go, he'll never forget. I don't understand, I cried out. She glanced away from me and was staring up at one of the hanging lanterns on the wall. Kid, she started pointing with her chin. Bring us down one of those lanterns. It will keep us warm. I didn't want to point out that I couldn't reach, but I didn't want to trust her either. The fact that she was tied up didn't mean much to me, but there was something about her, something that made me think it would take more than just ropes to keep her really trapped. What the hell am I going to do with a lantern? She snapped at me and must have realized I was suspicious of her. If I was going to hurt you, I'd need to be untied, don't you think? I guess. I shrugged and turned away to stare at the lantern that was concealed by a dark orange flame. It was impossibly high, so impossible that I think even if I jumped and swiped, I still would have missed it. So I turned around to face the woman with an apologetic smile on my face. For Christ's sake, she rolled her eyes. Untie me and I'll get it down myself. I could make out her eyes now, hidden behind her dark hair. While they weren't as horrifying as the dark pits that were Krampus's eyes, they were still scary, but in a different way. The woman didn't look at me like she wanted to eat me, or harm me, or do anything to me. In fact, if I was honest, she just looked damn straight annoyed. Any time now! She held up her hands. I approached cautiously, not just because of her, but because my foot was paining me. I found myself limping around the shattered floorboards, carefully avoiding the spiky bloody nails and sharp bits of wood that poked out here and there. If I untie you, I stammered, will you promise not to hurt me? I promise, she said. Now would you kindly untie me? I managed to yank at her restraints until the rope from her ankles was free. As I did, I could feel her cold breath slithering against my neck. And my hands? She said as I got up to walk away. You don't expect me to untie myself, do you? I didn't like how she was looking at me. She still seemed annoyed, but there was something else shimmering in the depths of her eyes. Even to this day I couldn't explain to you what it was, but her eyes spelled out something to me, something vague that had me wanting to run away. If you don't untie me, kid, I can't protect you from Krampus, she told me. I didn't want to tell her that Krampus was a large thing with horns and fur that she didn't stand a chance against, so I kept quiet. I thought she might have shouted at me if I disagreed with her. You want me to untie you? I asked her. Yes, she hissed impatiently. Why should I? I challenged her. Her eyes widened as she looked at me, as if she couldn't believe what I was saying. You already untied my feet, kid. You can't just leave me like this. Why not? I asked. Because. And she stopped to lean in closer, her voice low and cold. The demon lurks down here in the icy depths of his lair. He'll pull off your legs, rip off your arms, and eat every inch of you piece by piece. There's only one person who can save you from that, and that's me. You want to face him by yourself? Fine, be my guest. I'll just sit here and watch as Krampus devours every single— Okay. I cut her off. I didn't want to hear any more. Maybe I can untie you. Maybe. She raised an eyebrow before clearing her throat. Her voice was even lower now as she crawled on her knees towards me. You better watch out. You better not cry. Better hide quick, otherwise you'll die. Krampus has come into town. Stop it! I shouted at her. He's making a fist and clicking his wrist. Gonna give you wounds that you'll need to stitch. Krampus is coming to— Alright. I gave in. I'll untie you. It didn't take me long to work on a knot that had been tied, and pretty soon the rope unraveled around her until she snatched her hands free. Was that so hard? I watched her for a few moments pacing up and down, glancing occasionally at me the same way Dad looked at me whenever I did something wrong. Her skin had gotten a bit more colour as she walked up and down, but she was still pale, perhaps almost as pale as the snow itself. I looked down at my blackening feet and wondered whether or not I needed an adult. Hell! I heard her curse again as she began scavenging amongst the bits of shattered wood. Then she held up a few of the sharper bits of wood and was comparing them to one another. That was another thing I wish I had done, looked for a weapon to fight back with. Are we going to die down here? I asked her. Shh! She stormed over to me, dragging the lantern off the wall as she did. You have to be very quiet in this place. If he hears us, then he'll come for us. She made a hissing sound of her teeth as she tossed the lantern down to my feet. The warmth was intoxicating, and I found myself sinking to my knees beside, lapping up the heat as much as I could. Don't get too comfortable, the woman told me. I can feel him. He's near. What even is he? I asked. He's an associate of a man named Nicholas, the one you may know as Santa. He used to be a good man, who brought joy and gifts to children, as you've been taught. But throughout the years, Nicholas grew tired and bitter. After his wife died, he turned to dark magic, and it corrupted his mind. Through the dark magic that he practiced, Krampus was born, a monster who preys on naughty children who don't obey their parents. It wasn't the first time that evening that I wish I hadn't sworn at all. I wish I hadn't gone against my father's instructions and crept out of bed. I even regretted flipping off my sister. "So why are you here?" I asked. "You're not a child. Did Krampus bring you here?" "Yes," she nodded. "You're correct. I'm not a child, but there's no time to explain. We need to go." She grabbed me by the hand and stormed ahead towards a stairway, but with my blackened feet, I couldn't keep up with her, something she soon noticed. "You don't look in a good way, kid," she said with a sigh. "If we get out of here, I'm going to have to drop you off at a hospital." "But I hate hospitals," I shrieked and instinctively backed away from her. "Do you want to keep your feet or not?" She reached for me, but I stumbled out of her grasp. "You can't leave me at a hospital," I shouted, and didn't realize how loud my voice had gotten. I hated hospitals. I couldn't stand them. Not the smell, or the food, or the people, or anything. "I can't exactly go in there with you," she hissed and continued to try and grab me. "Do you know how bad that would even look? That I show up with you dressed in my nightwear with a child who has frostbite. They'll just throw me in jail straight away." "But you didn't do anything to me," I said. "They won't believe that," she replied. "I'll tell them that Krampus did it. Then they'll think we're both crazy," she scoffed. "Now if you can't run, then I'm going to have to carry you, aren't I?" "But my mum said I shouldn't trust strangers," I said, and realized that if I listened to my parents more often, I probably wouldn't be in the situation I am right now. She rolled her eyes with a sigh. "Fine. My name is Cass. I work at a nightclub in Austria. I'm 32, I have no boyfriend, and I'm probably going to die alone. I have an extremely severe deficiency in vitamin D, and I love cranberry juice. Now tell me something about yourself." I'm Dom. I'm 10 years old and I have a sister named Anya. We live in Baltimore, and there," she grabbed my hand. "We're hardly strangers anymore, are we?" I shrugged. Either way, I don't think I had much of a choice as she lifted me up into the air and lowered me onto her back. "You're really strong." "Hold on," she warned me as we started across the bridge. "Giddy up, horsey," I said jokingly. "Do not call me that." "Sorry." I winced and kept quiet after that. "We're almost there," I told the boy whose name I had already forgotten. He hadn't said anything in the 15 minutes that we'd been running, but I didn't blame him. When I was his age, I had ran this very bridge myself with the demon hot on my heels, and I hadn't been in a talking mood either. "We're almost there," I said again a few moments later, but I got the sense that he had stopped believing me by now. His arms were tightening around my neck as he squeezed tightly with his little legs, one of which was horribly dark. The chill had certainly got to him, but at least he was quiet. The last thing I wanted was a snivelling brat on my back. I peered over the edge of the bridge as we tore across it, feet slamming hard into the wood. A rocky death awaited us below should we have fallen. It was the same rocky death I'd seen Krampus plunge to the last time I encountered him, but I imagined he'd be wiser to my ploy this time. A large crop of rocky spikes stared at me from below, the same rocky spikes that had stared at me the last time I sent Krampus fall into his demise. There was dark red blood that clung to those tendrils below, staining it like algae on a coastal rock. "We're almost there," I said again, but I think both of us knew I was trying to convince myself more than I was trying to convince the kid. "Cass," he spoke, but he sounded weak all of a sudden. "I don't feel so good." I needed to get him to a hospital. The best I could do was get him to the end of the bridge, climb up the ladder that I had seen last time, and then drive him to a hospital. Maybe we wouldn't have to face Krampus at all. Maybe I was faster this time, and he was back in his lair, scratching names off his naughty list. "Stay with me, kid," I told him. "If you don't, then you're going to miss the story." "Story?" I heard him pick up a little. "What story?" "About the last time I was here," I said, panting as we ran. "Do you want to hear it?" "Yeah," he nodded his head. "I must have been about the same age as you," I began. "I was a little girl living in the bustling city of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Do you know where that is?" "No," he shrugged. "It's next to Maryland where you live. Like you, I ended up on Santa's naughty list." "What did you do?" he asked. "A little more than swearing," I smirked as I thought back. "But I won't be telling you that. Anyway, Krampus came for me on Christmas Eve, chasing me throughout my house as I tried to get away. I tried to make a lot of noise to wake up my parents, but it was no use. They never heard me. They were too interested in my little brother. My parents are always too interested in my sister," the boy remarked. "So you know what I'm talking about then," I noted. "When Krampus took me, I ended up here in his lair, but I guess I wasn't as brave as you." I was able to find shelter further in the cavern, where I snuck out occasionally to steal lanterns in order to keep warm. "How long were you here?" he asked me. 3 days. I shuddered by just saying it out loud. 3 whole days of hiding and running from him, until I got to this bridge here. How did you escape him? I felt the boy look over his shoulder and heard the breath catch in his throat. I knew what he had seen. I tricked him, was all I said as I slowed to a stop. It was a shame too. Just ahead, I saw the edge of the bridge, and there dangling from a snow-capped platform was the same rickety rope ladder that I frantically climbed up all those years ago. It couldn't have been more than just 20 paces away, and yet I knew in my gut that there was no outrunning him now. I heard him grunt. I had to give it to Krampus, my eternal nemesis. His girth was tremendous as he walked like a hunchback cripple, bent over and struggling, but he was deceptively fast. I had seen him leap from one side of a gorge to another, as he went hunting for another kid who ended up down here. That was the thing about him. He brought us here, but he wasn't brave enough to just kill us. No. He wanted us to feel fear first, wanted us to think that we were getting away, when in actuality, we were just playing right into his hand. "Why'd you stop?" The boy rocked on my back. "He's there! He's right behind us, Cass!" A part of me wanted to just make a break for it. I'd seen one kid try that the last time I was here, and even though he had 50 yards on the creature, it still caught up to him. I'd seen so many kids run from Krampus, and yet I was sure I was the only one that got away. That's why he still haunted my dreams, and that's why he brought me back here, the same way I always knew he would. "Cass!" The boy pulled at my hair, and I'd half a mind to smack him for that, but then again how could I blame him? "Go! Go!" he urged me, shoving at my shoulder. "We can't outrun him." I grabbed him and lifted him off my shoulder. "What do you mean?" "He'll catch us. It's what he does. He always gives the kids a false start, only so he can see the disappointment and anguish in their eyes when he finally does catch them." I tried to explain it as best as I could, but the boy's face only reddened as his lips began to curl. "Let me go!" He tried to wrench himself free, writhing like a fish dumped in lava. I glanced over my shoulder and saw my nemesis strolling towards me like he had all the time in the world. Truth was, he did. He swung one of the birch sticks in his hand, a long gilded stick that looked more like it belonged behind the glass of a museum than it did in his grasp. He smacked his own hand with it a few times during his approach. He had the nerve to adorn a Santa hat on his head that sat precariously in between his 2 crooked horns. His face was sagging, the grey skin around his cheek seeping off him like an age-old lumpy porridge. There were no eyes to stare into, just 2 dark, empty holes filled with crimson. It was only his mouth that gave away to what he was feeling, as his long grey tongue draped down his hairy chin, hungry. "Cass! Cass!" the boy shouted at me, and that's when I realised how I was going to outsmart Krampus once again. "We can't outrun him," I hissed at the boy, getting right up to his face so he knew I meant business. Honestly, I thought the little shit was about to break into tears right there and then. The colour had drained out of his face, and I must have really stunned him because he stopped shivering. "But you can." "Me?" he gulped. "What do you mean?" There wasn't much time to explain as Krampus started running towards us. A crazed screech escaped his mouth as he lifted the birch stick above his head, already swinging it. "He's coming!" the boy shrieked. "You better start running then," I told him as I shoved him away from me. He nearly fell over, and I was worried that he wasn't able to put any weight on that foot of his, but to his credit he found his balance and moved more like a dog for a few moments before hopping onto one foot towards the ladder. Krampus must have realised what was going on, because he let out a frustrated roar. He struck wildly with the birch stick, slashing at the sides of the bridge, completely deranged as he moved towards me. I lifted my fist, for all the good it would do. "Cass!" the boy cried out behind me. "Go!" I barked at him. "He can't get us both, now go!" I snapped, and that was the last thing I said to him. I heard him struggling with the ladder, but there was nothing I could do for him. Krampus would only need a few seconds with me, and while he usually played with his food, he would not be taking his time with me. Not today. Not when someone was about to escape. I wondered if he remembered me as he showed me his teeth, roaring and wailing like a demented fiend with an itch he couldn't scratch. I showed him my teeth, clenching my own so that he knew I wasn't going to go down so easy. No, I'd beaten him once. I tricked him into falling off the bridge as he overswung and went barreling over. I could beat him again, somehow. I wanted to wait for her, but my body had other ideas. Before I could realise I was halfway up the ladder, my arms moving on their own accord as I pulled myself up. My feet heavier than usual, and looking down at the weird blackened skin, I wondered if I was going to be okay at all. My other foot was showing signs of turning too, dark veins spreading across my ankle and starting to throb. Come on then, you bastard! Cass roared at Krampus. I sucked in a breath so hard I almost fell off the ladder when I saw Krampus striking with his stick. Cass was faster though, and was able to lunge to the side, ducking around his giant back and striking him hard in the kidney. I wanted to stay there and cheer Cass on, but I was scared that Krampus might hear me and come after me instead. The monster groaned, but it looked like it would take more than a single punch for him to go down. He swung around with a meaty arm and caught her in the cheek, flooring her without much hassle at all. She was dazed for a moment, but then she spat blood beside her and quickly got to her feet. "That all you got? Pussy?" She smirked, blood pooling down the side of her mouth. Krampus screeched at her and then lunged forward at a frightening speed. He lifted his stick again and then down at her, but Cass caught it before it could hit her. There was a moment of struggle then, as the pair of them locked eyes, wrestling for the stick. But then Krampus thrust his fists forward, catching her in the mouth again. Her head rocked back and Cass stumbled backwards, teetering dangerously close to the edge as she staggered against the rail. She had her hands up like a boxer, but she was wobbling from side to side, one eye twitching and the other one red. How hard he'd hit Cass I couldn't quite say. She knew how to take a punch though, but I didn't like her chances at taking a second. Krampus began to laugh at her, and I wanted nothing more than to descend down the ladder and fight him myself, but I was too afraid. Could you really blame me? I thought about telling my parents right away that Cass was stuck down here in this lair, but how would I even come back here? Would I have to wait until next year? Shit, I said to myself as I climbed a little higher and then a little higher. I couldn't save her. Even as I heard Krampus strike her again, I knew there was nothing I could do. I forced myself to stare upwards at the white light that had appeared, and tried not to listen to Krampus's wet furry fist that caught Cass in the face over and over again. But as I neared the top I heard Krampus grunt. He didn't sound so sure of himself all of a sudden, especially not when I heard the strangest sound escape Cass's mouth. Laughter. Gotcha again, she growled. I looked down just in time to see the pair of them go tumbling through the rail. I thought I saw Cass's legs wrapped around him, her arms gripped around his head and her teeth sunk into his neck. But it all happened so quickly, I don't know what I saw. Wood splintered everywhere as they disappeared into the darkness. There were no screams, no wails, no nothing. Just the sound of fabric whooshing through the air, followed by the abrupt thud as they hit the rocks below. Maybe I should have gone back to make sure Cass wasn't dead, even though I'd seen how sharp the rocks were and the sheer drop that led to them. I should have checked. I guess I didn't want to see blood, or even see how mangled her body looked as she hit the ground. Worst of all, I didn't want to see if Krampus survived. That would have made Cass's sacrifice in vain, if he was still there dusting off his fur and speeding his way back up to me. I forced myself up the ladder, hoping that maybe, just maybe Cass somehow made it. As I ascended higher and higher, I was soon absorbed by the white light ahead. I couldn't see anything, but somehow I felt warm all of a sudden as I kept on climbing. Suddenly I wasn't climbing at all, but instead walking. I tripped over something, stumbled to the ground and tried blinking away the white light as it surrounded me. I began to smell something, that piney smell from the tree in my living room, and the scented candles used by my mother. The white light began to fade around me, and there was a Christmas tree appearing as if from nowhere. Next came my dining table, and the door to the kitchen as well as the ceiling, the walls and everything in between. The sofa emerged as the white light was drained from the room. The windows were penciled in right before my eyes, and the curtains were thrown on as if they were dropped from above. The television came next, then the crucifix that hung so proudly in the living room, and even the wooden coffee table that we put our feet on. I was home. "Mom? Dad?" I shouted, relieved. But they weren't there. They must have been upstairs sleeping still. I stepped forward and staggered, nearly falling flat on my face as my feet betrayed me. There was no feeling left in my left foot, and it was as black as the night. My right foot wasn't faring any better, with the bones in my toes aching so bad that I thought they might have fallen off. I touched them to see if I could rub some feeling into either one of them, but the left one was just a useless bit of flesh now, and I suspected the right one wasn't far behind. Perhaps the state of my feet was proof that I hadn't dreamt any of it, that I had truly been in that icy lair. My parents had to believe me. I saw the cabinet was still open, and most of Dad's booze was empty, bottles scattered on the table and some pouring onto the floor. Dad would be mad about that, no doubt, but it would only be more proof of what I had been through that night. I thought about how Santa had been so mean to me, and whether or not I wanted to keep believing in him. Perhaps I didn't have a choice though. He seemed pretty real to me. "Mom? Dad?" I called out. They had to know what I'd been through, what I'd seen. I'd have to tell them about Cass and how she was still down there. I didn't care what sort of trouble I got into for being up so late. I was already in trouble for that. There was no punishment my parents could give me that compared to an evening of Krampus. "Mom? Dad?" I shouted at the top of my lungs as I limped forward, past the tree and even past the presents that Santa had left us. I wanted nothing from him. Never again. I crawled upstairs. I didn't care what sort of noise I was making this late in the night. My parents had to know what I'd seen. Mum? Dad? I stumbled into their room after having thrust open the door. It swung back against the wall, ringing out through the entire house. I was sure my dad would leap from the bed and come storming at me for making an entrance that loud at this time in the evening. But he didn't. He didn't even stir. Even my mum, who was a lighter sleeper of all, remained silent. Maybe because she was extra tired, I thought to myself as I made my way to their bedside. But there was a simpler explanation. They weren't there. I figured they must have been in Anya's room. They were probably playing with her again, probably cuddling her and holding her and having one big happy sleepover while I wasn't there. I rolled up my sleeves. I wasn't going to stand for that. I had been through too much this evening to allow my sister to upstage me anymore. I barely made it into her room as I crawled across the floor, ripped off her duvet and found nothing. Anya? I looked around the room, but there was no sign of my sister anywhere. My heartbeat began to quicken. I didn't like this feeling, the feeling that I was entirely alone. Everything seemed dark all of a sudden as I struggled out of Anya's room, back down the stairs in the blind hope of finding them all hiding behind the sofa. Maybe this was just one big prank and I hadn't seen any of the clues. On hands and knees I skulked back into the living room, moving past the fireplace, only to stop when I noticed my stocking on the floor. But everyone else's remained hanging. At least that was something I could be thankful for. I figured Santa had knocked mine over in his drunken rage, but at least he filled theirs up with candy. I crawled my way over to the stockings, expecting to see them loaded with treats, but something other than candy spilled out. It was just lumps of coal. I poured out the contents of every one of them, frantically shifting through them as if it would lead to some clue as to where my parents were, but the only thing that came out was tiny fragments of black rock. I didn't understand. Why had Santa given my family coal? My mind was racing with 1,000 thoughts, and none of them were good. I brought a shard of coal closer to my face to examine, only to remember the drawer I'd seen full of coal in Krampus's lair. Suddenly I realised where my family were. I looked down at the label on each stocking, and there written in black ink was one simple message. Greetings from Krampus.